Volkswagen was discussing cuts of up to 100,000 jobs. And in that same period, it proposed paying shareholders about 2.6 billion euros in dividends. These are not two separate pieces of news. They are one crisis, and it shows who stands first in line. Here is the main question of this autopsy. When Volkswagen comes under pressure, whom does it protect first? The buyer, the worker, or the shareholder? To answer honestly, we have to remember what this company was supposed to be. The name Volkswagen literally means the people's car. Not a luxury object, not a screen on wheels for the price of a small apartment, but a car an ordinary person could one day call his own. For almost a century, that name sounded like a contract between a company and millions of people. And that contract has a first page people do not like to remember. In 1938, people were offered a way to save for their own Volkswagen. Money paid in advance, stamp by stamp, week by week. 336,000 people joined. Remember that number. We will come back to it. This is the autopsy of a brand that did not start losing when cars became electric. It started losing when the simple car for the ordinary person stopped being its main concern. Empire. To understand the fall, first you have to see the height. At its peak, Volkswagen Group delivered almost 11 million vehicles a year to customers. It was not just a car maker, it was an industrial ecosystem. Golf for the family, Skoda for the cautious buyer, Audi for the executive, Porsche for the person who wanted to feel untouchable. Bentley, Lamborghini, Seat, Cupra, trucks, vans, leasing, banks, suppliers, unions, factory towns. Volkswagen was so big that it produced more than cars. It had its own logistics, its own factory culture, and even its own currywurst. That currywurst had a real parts catalog number, a factory sausage as an original Volkswagen spare part. In some years, Volkswagen produced more sausages than cars. It is funny, but it explains the old Volkswagen better than any commercial. The company knew how to standardize everything: metal, logistics, even lunch. But the future did not demand one more part. It demanded code. And there, the old precision stopped being a guarantee. In China, that world seemed almost unbeatable for a long time. For millions of buyers, Volkswagen was the safe German choice. Reliable, understandable, respected, and very profitable. The formula looked almost perfect. The people's brand gave scale. The premium brands gave margin. And the whole group earned money from every class of buyer. But inside that formula was a quiet danger. The higher Volkswagen rose above the ordinary buyer, the easier it became to forget why that buyer trusted the brand in the first place. Wound. The first promise began before Volkswagen became an ordinary company. In the late 1930s, people were told they could save for their own car. Not immediately, not with one payment. Gradually, a few Reichsmarks a week, a stamp in a savings booklet, a dream that slowly became visible on paper. Imagine a worker who brought those few coins every week and pasted in a new stamp, imagining how he would take his family to the sea in his own car. By the end of the war, more than 300,000 of those booklets were lying in dresser drawers across Germany. The factory that was supposed to build their cars turned toward war. 336,000 people. Not one car. Years later, compensation would come, but that is not the same thing as a fulfilled promise. This is not the fault of today's engineers. This is not an accusation against today's workers. It is simply where Volkswagen truly began, before it became the thing we know today. Drift. After the war, Volkswagen did something almost impossible. It made the promise real again. Beetle, then Golf, Polo, Passat. Cars that were not always the cheapest, but felt understandable. You understood what they were for. You understood who was supposed to sit behind the wheel. Then the center of gravity began to shift. Not sharply, but one quiet decision at a time. Through price, through complexity. The drift was visible not only in the price. It was visible in the fingers. Before, a driver could feel for the volume knob without taking his eyes off the road. Then it was replaced by a touch slider, a smooth strip, beautiful in a presentation and irritating in the dark when you simply need to turn the sound down. Volkswagen wanted to look modern, but sometimes modernity did not feel like progress. It felt like the loss of a simple thing that used to just work. The simple car was becoming more complicated. Understandable repair was turning into expensive diagnostics. The base model gradually grew covered in options, without which it already looked poor. Volkswagen did not become a premium brand overnight. It drifted there, one quiet decision after another. For a while, it worked. Investors liked the margin, management liked the sales structure. But the old strength of the brand was being eaten away from the inside. Volkswagen was still selling millions of cars, but the reason people chose Volkswagen specifically was becoming less obvious. Code. Then Volkswagen tried to escape into the future. After Dieselgate, the old diesel Volkswagen could no longer be a symbol of trust. The company had to prove that it had changed. Electric vehicles became a way to say, we are no longer the past. But an electric car is not just a battery instead of a tank. It is a car where software controls more and more of the experience. Navigation, updates, assistance, the whole interface, the way the driver feels the car at all. And here Volkswagen ran into a problem that could not be solved in the usual way. Metal can be perfected. A factory can be rebuilt. A supplier can be pressured. But code does not work that way. So the group created Cariad, a division that was supposed to write one shared software foundation for different brands. The idea was right. The execution became a warning. Porsche wanted one thing, Audi wanted another. Volkswagen needed a third. The group that knew how to coordinate factories, unions, suppliers, and governments could not coordinate its own software fast enough. Cars came out with bugs, launches moved, flagship models were delayed. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was that digital problems began reaching the simplest places in the car. In the United States, Volkswagen recalled almost 100,000 electric ID4s because of a problem with the door handles. Water could get inside the electronics. That could make the locks malfunction. And the recall documents pointed to the risk that the doors could open unexpectedly. Not an app freezing, not a menu loading slowly. Doors. On a car that was supposed to prove Volkswagen was ready for the future. That is how software stops being an abstraction. It becomes the moment when a person is driving down the road and suddenly understands, even a door is no longer just a door. For an ordinary buyer, a car does not begin with software architecture. It begins with trust in simple things. The door must close. The dashboard must show the driver what he needs. The button must do what it promises. When those exact things start requiring recalls, the person stops hearing beautiful words about the future. That is why the Rivian deal was more than a partnership. It was the moment when a German industrial giant admitted it could not build the car's new nervous system fast enough alone. Volkswagen agreed to invest up to $5.8 billion in a joint venture with Rivian. That is not just a line in a press release. It is the moment when scale stops being only strength and becomes weight. World moved on. While Volkswagen was trying to fix its new car, the entire world that once fed it was changing outside. Let's start with China. For a long time, Volkswagen was a foreign brand people trusted. Practical, accessible, recognizable. Then, Chinese companies began making electric cars that were more modern and often cheaper. BYD did not challenge Volkswagen's technology. It took Volkswagen's role. The practical car for a person who cared about price was now being made by someone else. That used to be Volkswagen's old job. By 2025, Volkswagen had fallen to third place in the market it had once opened for Western brands. China did not just beat Volkswagen in electric cars. China took the place Volkswagen itself had left open. And then, in the Baltic Sea, the water began to boil. Not at the factory, not on the shop floor, in the sea. After the Nord Stream pipeline was damaged, giant circles of bubbles appeared on the surface, and with them, a dependence that had once been invisible became visible. Cheap energy, on which all of German heavy industry had rested for decades, suddenly stopped being something self-evident. Volkswagen did not blow up the pipe, and the energy crisis was not the only reason for its problems. But it took the mask off. When energy became expensive, what had once been hidden behind scale became visible. Volkswagen's German factories were heavy, expensive, and slow for the new era. The world around Volkswagen did not stand still while people inside decided whose software mattered more. The world simply moved on. Bill. In 2025, the group was still selling millions of cars and revenue remained enormous. But profit from the core business collapsed by half, falling 53%. This was not a small company accidentally blown over by the wind. It was an empire that still moved millions of cars but could no longer make the old model work the way it used to. And then came the words that always sound cold in big companies. Savings, optimization, cuts, site closures. According to Reuters, Volkswagen was considering a scenario of closing 4 German plants and cutting up to 100,000 jobs. The company said its business model in its current form no longer worked. Maybe that is true. But a crisis shows more than problems. A crisis shows priorities. When pressure rises, it becomes clear whom the company protects first. And then came the number that made the crisis emotional. Volkswagen proposed paying shareholders about 2.6 billion euros in dividends. Behind Volkswagen stand not only markets. The controlling stake in voting rights in the group through Porsche SE is tied to the Porsche and Piech families. More than 80 years ago, one of Volkswagen's first shadows was already tied to money taken in advance from people who believed in it. For those people, the car never arrived. The money is different. The mechanism is different. But the feeling is too familiar. When it is time to decide whom to pay first, the money is found at the top. And the workers being cut and the buyers facing higher prices are once again told why they must accept the pain. On paper, it is legal, but legality is not the same thing as loyalty. And for a brand with a name like that, this is an especially dangerous difference. Apology. There are 2 ways to raise a price. One is to hide behind words like restructuring, margin, and competitive pressure. The other is to come out to people and say, we held on as long as we could, but we cannot anymore. Forgive us. There is a small story from Japan that explains this difference better than any chart. In Japan, there is an ice pop called Gari Gari Kun, a cheap bar that had cost almost the same for decades. When the manufacturer could no longer hold the old price, it raised it by only 10 yen, not an amount that destroys a life. But the company still understood it had broken something bigger than a price tag. Executives and employees appeared in an advertisement, stood before the camera, and bowed. They apologized. Not because 10 yen was a catastrophe, but because the price was not just a number. It was a quiet contract with the person who bought that product every day. This is what a company looks like when it still remembers to whom it promised affordability. Volkswagen could have done the same thing, not at the scale of ice cream, but at the scale of cars.
To say honestly, energy became more expensive, factories became heavier, the world changed, and we cannot leave everything as it was. We will not be the most luxurious, but we will still fight so that an ordinary car does not disappear from the life of an ordinary person. Volkswagen never said that sentence, and that is why its crisis feels like more than a business problem. It feels like the rupture of an old contract. Verdict. Volkswagen's tragedy is not that the company faced difficult choices. Every old empire faces them. The tragedy is something else. In a world where everything is getting more expensive, Volkswagen could have become especially necessary again. Not the cheapest, not the most luxurious, but the brand that at least tries to keep a normal car within the bounds of a normal life. Instead, it increasingly looked like a company walking away from its own role. It wanted premium margins. It wanted the story of a technology company. It wanted the scale of an empire. But its name still meant the people's car, and names like that create expectations that are hard to escape. Volkswagen will most likely survive this crisis. Empires that big rarely die in one clean moment. They shrink, restructure, sell assets, close factories, and tell themselves the old promise was just marketing. But that is exactly how the body goes cold. If this autopsy were done like a real one, there would be one object lying on the table. Not an engine, not a battery. A savings booklet. The same one where, more than 80 years ago, someone's hand pasted in stamps week after week for a car that never arrived. One of Volkswagen's first shadows lived in that booklet, in money taken in advance and not returned. More than 80 years later, the booklet looks different. Now it is called price, subscription, dividend. Every empire leaves a body. We do the autopsy. Next time, another giant that thought its name was stronger than the future. Subscribe, and we will open the next file.